Écoutez.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can.
Okay, great. So, okay, we're live.
Oh, we're live?
Yeah.
Okay, hi everybody. We had a technical problem. This is a reload. This is the Gnostic Gospel series with David Sarita, your host. And this week, we are going to go into the Gospel of Thomas. I don't see anybody here, Shiroz. I think we lost everybody.
They'll be back. They'll be back. They'll be back.
Well, I don't want to start until they're back. So let me just give people a couple of minutes here to see if any.
We got 3 people now. There, I got somebody. A couple of people.
Okay, just waiting for people. There we go. Hi, everybody. Okay. We are continuing here this evening with the Gnostic Gospel series. And I wanted to point out that when we get into Easter, we're going to go into, there are 3 major radical resurrection manuscripts. And remember that what are now deemed the Gnostic Gospels are not a fringe group of Christianity. They were the first Christians. They were the earliest Christians. They predate the first church of Constantine, and the first Roman church, which was around the 6th century. So it's been in a way labeled very carefully to call it Gnostic, meaning knowledge in Greek, gnosis, interior knowing, as opposed to some form of belief system that people adhere to. And they believe if they follow these rules, then they're guaranteed some kind of result at the time of death. But we can see, for example, in the Gospel of Philip, where Jesus says, and it's iconoclastic to say this, but remember what he's saying in Philip predates the church. And that is that you have to attain the resurrection while you live. And if you don't attain it when you live, when you die, you'll receive nothing. I mean, that's pretty radical. Radically different than the view of the Roman Catholic Church, and the first Catholic Church being born by the Roman Emperor Constantine, and then in Ephesus, Turkey, and then eventually the church moves to Rome, and we see the church emerge there, and later it's actually destroyed by Muslim conquerors in what is now Turkey, what used to be Ephesus. So is now Constantinople, because the church gets renamed by the Roman Emperor Constantine. And Constantine has a post early Christian experience where he sees a glowing cross in the sky in a vision. We don't know if it was an interior vision or he saw it with his own eyes, but that incited him to adhere to this new emerging religion. And in this new emerging religion, we have to understand that is conquering the empire, and the empire is starting to fall to pieces. It would take by 1000 AD for the Roman Empire to completely collapse, and with its arms stretched way beyond the local region of Rome and what is now Italy. The Roman Empire was a massive empire. And like any great empire, when you stretch yourself out too thin and you don't have enough soldiers and you don't have enough people who are loyal to your movement, your empire collapses. And we may even see some of that in our new world here. So we're not going into the resurrection gospels, which is the Apocryphon of John, the Acts of John, which is a phenomenal piece of work. It's a huge piece of work when we go into the Acts of John, we're not going to be reading the entire thing because it is so massive. But one of the things I haven't done yet is gone into one of the most famous pieces of work in the early Christian period is the Gospel of Thomas. And you can go, this is only one resource online, but if you go to gnosis.org, gnosis.org, you'll see there's an alphabetical index there where, again, these aren't all of them. The Acts of John, I don't think is in here. Let me just double check because I'm going to go into my alphabetical index. The Acts of John, I don't see here off the top of my head, because there were pieces of work discovered in Nag Hammadi, Egypt, in clay jars in approximately 1945, which is the end of World War II. But that is not all that has been found. And in fact, even the Gospel of Judas, which is an incredible masterpiece. In fact, we should probably treat the Gospel of Judas coming into the Easter period, because it is a radically different view of the role of Judas, not as betrayer at all in the Gospel of Judas. He's merely following the instructions of his master to turn him in. And it's an incredible piece of work. And again, these pieces of work, when the copies, because the earliest Christians relied on the repetition of oral mastery. And oral mastery, I mean, there are children in India today that can recite the entire Bhagavad Gita perfectly. Children. So you have to understand that in the ancient world, for a person to be a true repeater or teacher of a piece of work or the sayings of Jesus, they had to master it perfectly. It's not like somebody just loosely heard things that the Savior said and decided to repeat the story, and then so-and-so heard it from so-and-so, and it became a story of hearsay versus real fact. And then we had a big mess in the end. That's not how early teachings were propagated. There was a student and a teacher, and the teacher would make sure the student had oral perfection of the teaching before they could go out spreading the good news, which is what gospel means, spreading the news. So by the time physical copies were written down, in fact, in the Gospel of Thomas, in fact, there is a scene where, in one version of Thomas, where Thomas says, "I wrote these things down. These are the secret sayings that the living Jesus spoke, and Didymus Judas Thomas recorded." But in one version, it says that Thomas wrote these things down. So in this version, it says he recorded them. And recorded doesn't sound like oral. It sounds like they were written down. But when the copies that were found in Nag Hammadi, Egypt in 1945 got dated, as in the date of when it was written down on the leather-bound, form of recording language, that doesn't mean they're not perfect works, because some of them date slightly older than the canonized Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and the current book of Acts, and First and Second Timothy, those type of manuscripts that are canonized. Some of them actually are from the same period, and some are older, but they're not that much older. They're within a window of about 400 years after the time of Christ. I mean, that would be the extreme of the window. And even the canonized Gospels are somewhere around 160 years after the time of Christ, which again is unacceptable if it's hearsay, where it's just relying on a form of gossiping. But that's not how these things work, because when you see the perfection of the way these words are spoken, one of the things I've studied many world religions in great detail. There's nobody who speaks like Jesus. There's nobody who speaks in this language. It's not like it's something that was borrowed. Because if we look at the biblical prophets, even they don't speak in this language. It's something, akin to, in fact, it was Elaine Pagel's professor of religion at Princeton, who's one of the translators on the Nag Hammadi Library project. And again, note that the Nag Hammadi Library does not contain all of the alternative Christian literature. So because all of this wasn't found at one time in these clay jars. In fact, there are fragments of Thomas that go back before the discovery of in Nag Hammadi, Egypt. So when you see, this is quoting from the Gospel of Thomas by Stephen Patterson and Marvin Mayer, translators. And again, there are other translations, and they do vary. And when a translation varies, it's because when they're translating from the original language into the English language, certain words can go two ways. And that's difficult, right? That's very difficult, because when you're talking about perfection, you're saying, what do you mean it can go two ways? Well, just go today and compare a New Living Bible to, for example, a King James, which King James is one of the earliest English translations of the Bible, but it's not the only one. There are others. But again, when you look at differences in different canonized Bibles, there are some serious differences of the way words are translated from the Greek, because those are all, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are all Greek, and the book of Acts, it's all Greek. And remember, Jesus didn't physically walk in Greece, so you're looking at Greek recordings of Christian sayings. So in the Gospel of Thomas, in verse 1, and he said, whoever discovers the interpretation of these sayings will not taste death. So first of all, that first statement is an iconoclasm against the church, because the church says they have the authority to baptize a person in the name of the living God, and that you don't have to do anything. But this actually says that whoever discovers the interpretations of these things, to not taste death means to attain immortality, and to attain essentially the resurrection, that which doesn't die, that which can't be killed. But it's telling you have to discover the interpretation of these sayings first. That's very different than what the church sold the world. So in verse 2, Jesus said, those who seek should not stop seeking until they find, which again suggests, very similar in the canonized Gospels, seek you first the kingdom of heaven, and then all else will be added unto you, is canonized. But then it also says that you have to seek. So, but it's saying you can't rely exclusively on your baptism, which is really an initiation. And then in Thomas it says, when they find, they will be disturbed. When they are disturbed, they will marvel and will reign over all. And after they have reigned, they will rest, meaning they will attain peace. So this is the first statements in Thomas are, and whoever discovers this will attain immortality, but you have to seek and keep seeking until you find. That's huge. That is a massive revelation. In fact, that's something that looks more like, if you look into the work of Christian saints that the interior work that Saint Teresa describes in the 7 levels of the interior castle, it sounds like an interior work, and it's not something as simple as just being baptized. In verse 3, Jesus says, if your leaders say to you, look at the Father's kingdom is in the sky, then the birds of the sky will precede you. If they say to you is in the sea, then the fish will precede you. Rather, the Father's kingdom is within you and outside of you. So again, it's talking about an interior gateway. So how do you find this interior state of heaven? How as a seeking, which means a method. When you know yourselves, then you will be known, and you will understand that you are children of the living Father. But if you do not know yourselves, then you live in poverty, and you are the poverty. So you have to know thyself. In verse 4, Jesus said, the person old in days won't hesitate to ask a child 7 days old about the place of life, and that person will live. So he's saying the person who's old in days will live if they inquire to a child 7 days old about the place of life. For many of the first will be last and will become a single one. And you're going to see in the Gospel of Thomas a great wealth in the language of converting dualistic thinking into singularity. Jesus said in verse 5, know what is in front of your face, and that is what is hidden from you will be disclosed to you. So knowing what's in front of your face is actually a very Buddhistic kind of thought, because in Buddhist practice, you're watching your breathing, which is right in front of your face, and you're watching through your eyes, or you close your eyes and you go into awareness, and in this awareness practice, you're actually scanning your entire body for sensations that arise and pass away, and arise and pass away. But knowing what's in front of your face, it is a practice, and they could be interpreted as knowing what is here and now. The whole philosophy of being right here, right now. And when you practice being here and now, the hidden becomes revealed to you. So in some translations of Thomas, it's not disclosed to you, it's revealed to you. For there is nothing hidden that will not be revealed, and there is nothing buried that will not be raised. So again, this is an interior exercise of knowing what's happening in the present moment. And then when you do this practice, and I've been doing these practices daily for 45 years, I can tell you what eventually happens is this blinding light starts to become very accessible on a daily basis when you go to meditate and pray. And this blinding light fills you with supreme, very, very pure ecstasy. And this ecstasy, if the feeling is you've been raised up to a much higher frequency where you don't perceive suffering at all, not mental suffering, and you actually don't get pulled down by physical suffering. And that's where you're going to see that Jesus didn't physically actually notice any suffering when he was being beaten and crucified in the Acts of John. So this is an enormous difference. In verse 6, his disciples asked him and said to him, do you want us to fast? How should we pray? Should we give to charity? What diet should we observe? This is great, because how many people think Jesus was eating avocado sandwiches with sprouts? Jesus said, don't lie and don't do what you hate, because all things are disclosed before heaven. After all, there is nothing hidden that will not be revealed, and there's nothing covered up that will remain undisclosed. So Jesus said in verse 7, lucky is, actually, this is an interesting translation. Lucky is the lion that the human will eat, so that the lion becomes human. And foul is the human that the lion will eat, and the lion will still become human.
It's
In
different
verse
than the
86.
one you're used to?
Well, there's one version where he says, "Don't eat what you don't like." That was actually in the same verse. But
Right,
again, there are slight differences, because
right.
this is his answer to, do you want us to fast, pray? Should we give to charity, and what diet should we observe? He's saying, don't do what you hate, because all things are disclosed before heaven. Now, if you feel better, I mean, on a pure vegetarian diet, which I've done for over 40 years, but I'm not a pure vegetarian anymore for reasons that is a whole other subject. But I've noticed, I can tell you this, it makes no difference what you eat. The state of interior illumination and this blinding bliss state, which has been happening to me every day for at least the last 2 years when I meditate. And there's more ecstasy in this state than any human can possibly bear. In fact, this physical organism it's very hard on my organism to bear the states of ecstasy that I go into on a daily basis. And it's actually, I can see it's actually quite hard on me to do that. So that means that it actually has nothing to do with food. And when Jesus is saying this, we don't have any evidence that his diet was any different than the diet of the Jewish people. So he would have eaten fish, of course, because the apostles were all fishermen. And Mary Magdalene's family owned a huge fishing village, and they were very wealthy fishing merchant family that most scholars today agree that it was her family that was funding the Jesus movement. Therefore, we know at least he ate fish. We don't see any scenes of him eating, so we really don't know if he even ate at all at a certain age, because there's evidence in the Acts of John before the crucifixion where the apostle John will lean up against him and put his hand right through him. So he's like a hologram. He's not even solid. And there is an example in the Acts of John where it says that Jesus never excreted any human waste at all. So at a certain stage of his mission and his personal transformation, he may not have eaten anything other than the bread of communion at a certain point. And how he sustained himself, again, he's not anything like us. I mean, the more you study him, the more you'll understand he's nothing. He's not like a human being that attained enlightenment. He's merely showing us the way, and he was born completely realized as God. So very, very different. And it's amazing that the Christian church threw out a lot of these pieces of evidence that if he was holographic before his crucifixion, then what does that say about putting nails in a body that can appear as a hologram? It says that it wouldn't suffer. But again, he's nothing like us. So in verse 8, he says, the person is like a wise fisherman who cast his net into the sea and drew it up full of little fish. Among them, the wise fisherman discovered a fine large fish, and he threw all the little fish back into the sea and easily chose the large fish. Anyone here with 2 good ears had better listen. So, and these are very common, these first ones. I'm actually, because Thomas is so large, and I'm only going to spend one day on Thomas. And I really urge you, when you read Thomas, the purpose is to meditate upon the sayings until you have an experience, not to read them and have some intellectual idea about what he means. So, verse 10, I have cast fire upon the world, and look, I'm guarding it until it blazes. That means he's coming as both a destroyer of the old ideas, and he's turning it to fire so that it blazes, and so that he can make way for these new understandings of the way to heaven. And Jesus said, this heaven will pass away, and the one above it will pass away. The dead are not alive, and the living will not die. The living will not die. During the days when you ate what is dead, you made it come alive. When you are in the light, what will you do? On the day when you were one, you became two. And when you become two, what will you do? So this is the language of going from singularity, where there is no good and evil, because good and evil is an intellectual judgment. In fact, for the person who ends good and evil, they end the conflict within, which means that person is incapable of a violent act. Because if there's no conflict within, if there's no judgment, and you don't judge somebody else, how do you become angry with them so as to go to war with them? You see what I mean? It's kind of like a Zen koan. Well, there has to be good and evil. Well, the problem with good and evil is everyone interprets it differently. Everybody has different ideas about it, and they argue, and they build walls and fences around their ideologies, and they alienate and cast each other out, and they go to war with each other. But when you end duality and you're single, there is no more war. The war has to be going on inside first before it can materialize in the exterior world. So when he says, but when you become two, what will you do? Because when you were in the light, which means before you were born, you were one. You were in the singularity, the field of interconnected love and supreme bliss, supreme bliss. But there's a lesson for all of us for a reason why we actually came here. We took in good and evil, judgment, and it got us into a lot of trouble. In fact, every argument is based on the foundation that one person says, I see it this way, and you see it that way, and we don't see eye to eye. So there's a way of being at peace with that too, because there's a beauty to us all seeing it a different way, as long as we respect our differences. But if we don't respect our differences, then, you see Will Smith slapping Chris Rock in the face, which is the beginning of an argument that I think I'm right and you're wrong, which is judgment. So the message of non-judgment is enormous in the message of Jesus. Verse 12, the disciples said to Jesus, we know that you are going to leave us. Who will be our leader? Jesus said to them, no matter where you go, to James the just, for whose sake heaven and earth came into being. Of course, James is clearly the brother of Christ. So he's saying that if he goes, that James has everything you need. So, and again, every one of his apostles, the males and the females, had everything you need. But he's actually putting...
Why does he single out James?
Because he's his physical brother. And that is in the canonized Gospels. It's just that Christians miss it, thinking that he means brotherly. But, and I can go back to that. I'm going to try and go through more of Thomas. And I'm just scanning some of this because I know we'll not get through it. Jesus said to his disciples, compare me to something and tell me what I am like. Simon Peter said to him, you are like a just messenger. Matthew said to him, you are like a wise philosopher. This has to be really early on in when Matthew is joining the movement, because for him to say you're like a wise philosopher means he's not very awake. Thomas said to him, teacher, my mouth is utterly unable to say what you are like, because Thomas at this point is having the experience of being intoxicated in the bliss, because Jesus says, I am not your teacher because you have drunk. You have become intoxicated from the bubbling spring that I have tended. Intoxicated means high, means that you're getting really high on the vibrations of the living spirit of the living God. And I'm showing you how to access it. But Matthew calls him a wise philosopher. And remember, Matthew's in the canonized Gospels. Thomas said to them, if I tell you one of the sayings he spoke to me, you will pick up rocks and stone me, and fire will come from the rocks and devour you. This is Thomas. Jesus said to them, if you fast, you will bring sin upon yourselves. If you pray, you will be condemned. And if you give to charity, you will harm your spirits. When you go into any region and walk about the countryside, when people take you in, eat what they serve you and heal the sick among them. Now, obviously, wherever they go, they're not going to get a sprout and avocado sandwich and the salad. Okay, so, and they're obviously not vegan. And I'm not making fun. Veganism is, I've done it. And you have to really know what you're doing so as to not harm your physiology there. That's all I'll say about that. So again, he's saying the food of the body is not important at all. It's what comes in here. After all, what goes into your mouth will not defile you, he says. Rather, it's what comes out of your mouth that will defile you. It's not what goes into your mouth that will defile you. So he's not a biological purist. He's not like the Essenes, who did a lot of fasting and lived on grasses and wild plants. So he's not like that at all. Verse 15, Jesus said, when you see who was not born of a woman fall on your faces and worship, that one is your father. This is a very difficult saying to ponder. And you have to come into yourself and see the place within you that preceded your own birth. And the witness that stares through your eyes, that feels everything you're feeling, all the vicissitudes of your life, is indestructible. You're going to see this in the Gospel of Thomas everywhere, that you have to find the origin of your own self, which is a self-inquiry. And if you look upon your whole life right now, I can look back over 60 years because I'm over 60 years old, and I can say, who's been here the whole time? Who survived everything? Who survived everything that ever happened to me? Me, the source me, the one who's experiencing it all, the purity of what's called the witness. That one is indestructible. And that's the one that was not born of a woman. Yes, this thing, the hands, the eyes, the face, was born of a woman, but not the living spirit that resides inside of us. The pure beingness was not born of a woman. So he's asking you to find that and rest in that place. Jesus said in verse 16, perhaps people think that I've come to cast peace upon the world, and not to know that I've come to cast conflicts upon the fire, sword, and war. There will be 5 in a house. There will be 3 against 2, and 2 against 3, father against son, and son against father, and they will stand alone. This is because his new teachings are going to be radical. They're not a belief system. They were meant to cause a person to go within and have the experience of the living God within them. And he knows it's going to cause problems, because when we cling to our religious belief, and if anybody goes against it, we're going to get our fists up and we're going to start doing this. The disciples said to Jesus, tell us how our end will come. Jesus says, have you found the beginning then, that you are looking for the end? You will see the end will be where the beginning is. Congratulations to the one who stands at the beginning. That one will know the end and will not taste death. So this is exactly what I was just saying. Find your origin. Where is the origin of your awareness? What is also going to be there at the end? The end will be where the beginning is, he's saying. So the person looking through your eyes is going to be there at the end and was there at the beginning. And he's saying that is the person inside of you that doesn't taste death. It doesn't die. It's only the surface, the flesh, that will die. And he's saying that is that is your own immortality, is your own pure witnessing. Yes, you hurt your foot. Yes, you may have lost a family member like I did. Yes, you may have had everything destroyed in your life, but who is still there? The pure witness. So this verse 18 is immense. But the point is to get to know that space in yourself, to rest in that space as your own eternity. Because the more you rest there, the more you rest.
It's said in the beginning of this gospel that anyone who reads this and can understand the interpretation will not experience death.
Right, exactly.
Something like that, anyway.
Yeah, and that's why every one of these verses is a gateway to experience. Verse 20, the disciples said to Jesus, "Tell us what the kingdom of heaven is like." He said to them, "It is like a mustard seed, the smallest of all seeds. But when it falls on prepared soil, it produces a large plant and becomes a shelter for birds in the sky." Okay, he's speaking about the abundance of heaven. Heaven is abundant. This world is full of poverty because banks won't. They want to enslave people. So why? Because they think they're poor. They actually enslave us because they think they're poor and they need your money. Now this cost, verse 21, Mary said to Jesus, "What are your disciples like?" Wait a minute. Weren't we told that Mary was an apostle, a disciple? He's saying, "What are your disciples like?" She is removing herself from the role of disciple. And remember, in the Gospel of Philip, Jesus is kissing her often on her lips, and he says, "The perfect ones conceive life in the womb by a kiss," so that we know he gave her children because she is his secret wife. To protect the lives of the children, he didn't disclose their marriage openly and that who she really is. But she's not calling herself a disciple. She didn't say, "What are us disciples like?" She's saying, "What are your disciples like?" So you have to understand how deep this is. He said, "They are like little children living in a field that is not theirs. When the owner of the field come, they will say, 'Give us back our field.' They take off their clothes in front of them in order to give it back to them, and they return their field to them. For this reason I say, if the owners of a house know that a thief is coming, they will be on guard before the thief arrives and will not let the thief break into their house, their domain, and steal their possessions. As for you, then, be on guard against the world. Prepare yourselves with great strength, so the robbers can't find a way to get to you, for the trouble you expect will come. Let there be among you a person who understands. When the crop ripened, he came quickly carrying a sickle and harvested it. Anyone here who has 2 ears better listen." Because Jesus knows all of his apostles are going to get crucified and killed and murdered. He knows that. So he's saying to them, basically, don't have any possessions, because
David, it's the gospel of Philip that includes Mary as one of the apostles, right?
Right, but it doesn't really say it like that. It's clear. It says in Philip that Jesus loved her more than all of the apostles. So, and they were jealous. The males were jealous. And again, he kept it very secret. And that's because, just like himself, his family had to protect him from Herod's armies going to kill the child, the persecution of the innocents, because he knew that they were trying to kill him so that he wouldn't grow up into a man before he started his mission. And he knows that his own children with Mary are in grave danger. And we're going to go into that in great detail, which we did cover a lot of it already, actually. For those of you who haven't...
You check the clock at 6:18 exactly.
At 6:18, 6:18. Jesus saw some babies nursing. He said to the disciples, "These nursing babies are like those who enter the Father's kingdom." They said to him, "Then shall we enter the Father's kingdom as babies?" Jesus said to them, "When you make the two into one," again, you end duality, good and evil, "and when you make the inner like the outer, and the outer like the inner, and the upper like the lower, and when you make the male and female into a single one, so that the male will not be male nor the female female." He's telling you to transcend your body. He's trying to tell you to go right into the, don't look up, don't look down, don't look within, don't look outside. Cancel, it's called canceling all the pairs of opposites. And so that when you cancel all the pairs of opposites, the consciousness no longer moves and you attain stillness. Be still and know that I am God. How does stillness happen? When you stop looking and you're in what's called the non-moving state, that you realize that God is exactly where you already are, and that there is no search there, but there is stillness, and there is the mastering of stillness. He says, when you make eyes in place of an eye, hand in place of a hand, foot in place of a foot, an image in place of an image, then you will enter the kingdom. I will choose you 1 from 1,000 and 2 from 10,000, and they will stand as a single one. So he's saying it's the ones he chooses to be his apostles are rare. 1 from 1,000, 2 from 10,000. And these apostles will stand as a single unit because they are in this singularity. Verse 24, show us the place where you are, for we must seek it. He said to them, anyone with 2 ears better listen. There is light within a person of light, and it shines on the whole world. If it does not shine, it is dark. So he's saying there is light in a person of light, that when you enter this state, you will experience the living light right where you are. Verse 25, love your friends like your own soul. Protect them like the pupil of your eye. Verse 26, you see a sliver in your friend's eye, but you don't see the timber in your own eye. When you take the timber out of your own eye, then you will see enough to remove the sliver from your friend's eye. This is again comes from the saying that you where in the canonized gospel, it's a very similar statement around judgment. That don't judge because you can't even see clearly yourself. You can't really judge. I'm just going to skip by some of these because we're not going to get through them all. Oh, this is a great one. Verse 29. We're only on verse 29. If the flesh came into being because of spirit, that is a marvel. Meaning he's mocking that idea that our spirits were born at the time our flesh was born, which is what a lot of fundamentalist Christians believe. But if spirit came into being because of the body, that is the marvel of marvels. Yet I marvel how this great wealth has come to dwell in this poverty. So he's saying that the opposite. The spirit is the great wealth. The body is the poverty. And how did it come to dwell here? Right? Because we got somehow each one of us got sucked in to take in the knowledge that Adam and Eve were sucked into, which is judgment. Because good and evil is judgment. It's a mind trick. God's goodness, as I experience it every day in prayer and meditation, is so blindingly full of supreme, limitless ecstasy that as goodness, God's goodness dwarfs all human egotistical concepts of what is good and what is bad. It dwarfs it, that they're not even in the same category. So to say that there is good in this world, I mean, in Philip, Jesus said, in this world there is good and evil. Its good things are not good, he said. They're not good. Because God's good dwarfs the egotistical vision of humanity. And the egotistical vision of humanity is a constant keeping up with the Joneses, if you will, philosophy, or why is it that the Kardashians can't seem to hold their relationships? Because they're not full of the living spirit of God. And when you're full of the living spirit of God, you're not relying on good entertainment to keep your relationship together, are you? You're full. In fact, you're overflowing. But when you need billions of dollars to entertain yourself and you're still not happy because you don't know this living spirit, then you're empty. no matter how many billions of dollars you have. And that equates to Jesus saying, for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven is like a camel passing through the eye of a needle. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't be wealthy and enter the kingdom of heaven. It means if you cling to your wealth, if you hold it as I'm better than you, you're nowhere. You haven't figured out anything yet. So let's see. Jesus said in verse 33, interesting, it's verse 33, what you will hear in your ear, in the other ear proclaim from your rooftops. That means when you get a vision, you receive vision. He says, after all, no one lights a lamp and puts it under a basket, nor does one put it in a hidden place. Rather, one puts it on a lampstand so that all who come and go will see its light. That means when you're lit up, don't be humble and hide yourself and pretend you're not lit up. Let the whole world see it. Jesus said, if a blind person leads a blind person, both of them will fall into a hole. We've only got, we ran a little late, so I'll be able to go a little longer. I'm going to see verse 37. When will you appear to us, and when will we see you? This is a great verse. Jesus said, when you strip without being ashamed, and you take your clothes and put them under your feet like little children and trample on them, you will see the Son of the Living One, and you will not be afraid. Now remember, he's referring to the Garden of Eden, because when Adam and Eve were naked, they were not ashamed until they took of the forbidden knowledge that causes judgment, which is good and evil. And they judged themselves, and they were ashamed. Oh my God, I'm naked. And God knew, oh my God, you're judging yourself. He knew that they took in the knowledge that causes first self-judgment, which is being ashamed. And then they made some fig leaves and put clothes on them. This is one of the most incredible parables in the Bible, because it shows that the human has taken in the knowledge that causes judgment and shame. He's saying you should be unashamed, and you should be able to, you should strip without being ashamed. And this is also internally, stripping internally and not being ashamed,
really cool.
being exposed to everything that you've done, every mistake you've made, everything. God sees everything. I want to tell you this. In my second meeting with Christ in 1997, which was Easter morning, Jesus scanned my whole body, and all these holograms of all these things I did appeared like little movies all around me, and he was reading all of them. And he saw my first girlfriend, Sue, and he saw everything that I did. And he doesn't judge any of it. It's just all there. This is what, this boy did in his life. And then you're free of it. You see, he's saying when you strip, it also means physically, but it's more about going back to the Garden of Eden yourself with your own divine partner. Go into nature and do this ritual, and don't be ashamed. Verse 38, Jesus says, often you have desired to hear these sayings that I am speaking to you, and you have no one else from whom to hear them. There will be days when you seek me and you will not find me. Verse 39, the Pharisees and scholars have taken the keys of knowledge and have hidden them. They have not entered, nor have they allowed those who want to enter to do so. As for you, be as sly as snakes and simple as doves. Jesus said, verse 40, a grapevine has been planted apart from the Father. Since it is not strong, it will be pulled up by its roots and it will perish. Meaning it was planted apart from the Father. Okay, I'm just scanning through these. Verse 45, Jesus said, grapes are not harvested from thorn trees, nor are figs gathered from thistles, for they yield no fruit. Good persons produce good from what they've stored up. Bad persons produce evil from the wickedness they've stored up in their hearts and say evil things. For from the overflow of the heart they produce evil. Okay, this is good and evil. Harvest, thorns versus not thorns. This is good and evil. And again, what causes a person to fall into good and evil and do things that are violent is that they are stuck in the conflict. They can't get out of the conflict. And they also see themselves as selfish. That it's just me. It's all my money. I made all the money. It's all my, blah, 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 blah. And so they have all the money in the world, and are they happy? Right? So do they take away from others to have this excessive amount of wealth? Verse 46, Jesus says, from Adam to John the Baptist, among those born of women, not one is so much greater than John the Baptist that his eyes should not be averted. But I have said that among those, that whoever among you becomes a child will recognize the Father's kingdom and will become greater than John. This is very similar in the canonized Gospels. The same thing is said, although it reads a little different. That John the Baptist is the greatest among born of women. John the Baptist was a prophet. In fact, John the Baptist doesn't become a Christian. He doesn't follow Jesus. He continues to baptize people, and he creates his own movement because John is plugged into God. But Jesus is saying any of you who becomes a child and recognizes the Father's kingdom will become greater than John. It's an enormous statement. It is to state that even you who becomes a child and enters the kingdom of heaven, you become greater than a prophet. And that is an absolutely enormous statement. So I'm going to skip through. Oh, this is another amazing one. Verse 48, Jesus says, if two make peace with each other in a single house, they will say to the mountain, move from here, and it will move. Now, if two who are in duality, in good and evil, make peace with each other in a single house, a house of non-dualism, they attain enormous power. And we know, I can tell you that wherever I've lived, from Los Angeles to Colorado to mountains of Canada to the cities in Canada to living in San Francisco as a kid, I don't know more than a handful of people who live together in a single house who are still together. And that means husbands and wives and partners. They don't stay together because they can't make peace with each other. Why? Because each one thinks that they're better than the other. The other one doesn't, I understand. We fight because I'm right and you're wrong, that whole thing. So it is actually a great attainment if two people can live in a house and attain peace, singularity with each other. Now, you may last a few years. You may last 10 years. You may last 15 years. But it's very rare. It's extremely rare that two people can make peace with each other in a single house. I just got a call today. The guy who was going to repair my ceiling inside, his son, who has 5 kids with his wife, is leaving his wife, and the 5 kids are now going to be in this separation. And so this is so common. So this is the real work of the Christian movement. It's not as simple as just going and being baptized and having your sins forgiven on Sunday. The Gospel of Thomas, and I'll end it here because this is an enormous piece of work. I really urge you to go through these sayings and really meditate upon them slowly. Don't try to read Thomas. Try to experience Thomas. Try and have an experience. If it takes you a year or more to get through all these sayings and really meditate on them, try and have an experience with it because it's designed to do that. And again, like I said in the beginning tonight, there's nobody else in the world of biblical prophets who speaks like this. If we can go to theories that Jesus never existed, and you can go read the early Greek manuscripts and of different Greek, like Dionysius. You can read all of them. Yeah, crucifixion was very common in the old world. There were thousands of people who were crucified. There were thousands of people who spoke like prophets who got crucified. That doesn't mean that Jesus didn't exist, because there's another guy who prophesied and got hung on a cross, who had a different name but spoke similar things. No, there's nobody who talks like this. And you see this in the canonized Gospels. In verse 51, his disciples said to him, "When will the rest of the dead take place, and when will the new world come?" He said to them, "What you are looking forward to has come, but you don't know it." It's right in front of you. He's saying the kingdom of heaven is really right here, and the peace is right here. But two people can't live in a house and attain peace with each other and become single, so that house becomes single. And if the house becomes single, because remember, he said, if two or more of you are gathered in my name, I will be there. It's very similar. But those two have to have attained peace, both of them. Because you can't have one person say, I'm at peace and I live alone in the wilderness. Because that's easy. But then eventually you get bored, and then you want to get a cat and a dog. And then your life gets complicated, because my dog just ran away, and I got the police to go look for him on his dog tracker, and he was gone for 2 days, and my daughters were crying their eyes out like babies. And then he came home. Somebody let him go who trapped him. So again, the work is very deep here. He's saying if two reach peace in the house, that house becomes a house of God, actually. And you say to the mountain, move from here, and it will move. He's not kidding. He's saying the greatest miracles happen if two or more make peace. And this is yeah, you can be at peace with each other for a day or two. How many times do siblings get together with their parents and fight like crazy? And I think it's funny now, because I realize everything we argue about is because of this stubborn nature where we think we're right and the other person's wrong, rather than seeing everybody sees it in this holographic awareness slightly differently than the other person. And we can be at peace with that. We don't have to agree. The idea of making peace isn't that we should agree that we're seeing things the same way. Not at all. That we should honor that the other person sees it differently. Somebody will read Thomas, have a completely different insight than me. Great. That's what these are designed to do. The sayings of Jesus are like the facets of a gem, of this beautiful sapphire. The throne of God was actually a sapphire throne, in that everyone will see from a different perspective, and that there is no good guy and there is no bad guy. There's only you and me, and we just disagree. I love that song. I'm trying to remember who sang that song. Brilliant lyrics, incredibly brilliant lyrics. So we just disagree, but that's great. Now, if we can live in peace and disagree, we've really attained peace. Why do we have this war on this planet? Because we're so serious about the fact that we disagree. This planet has been fighting and fighting and fighting for thousands of years. Thousands of years. There's always somebody who's got more power than the other one, and they think they're better. And we don't know how to do verse 48. If two make peace with each other in a single house, they will say to the mountain, move from here, and it will move. There are actual scriptures in the Old Testament where an angel annihilates and moves an entire mountain, and God tells the angel, withdraw your hand. See, from the place of singularity, Even the mountain is an illusion. And the mountain between you and your goal that you're trying to get to is also part of this. You have to make peace with your goal and find out what your goal is and become single with it so that you're fully merged with it. And with that, again, I urge you to, because we're not going to spend more time on Thomas. It's enormous. There is, I can go to the last verse. This is really radical. The final verse. 113 says, his disciples said to him, when will the kingdom come? It will not come by watching for it. It will not be said, look here or look there. Rather, the Father's kingdom is spread out upon the earth and people don't see it. That's because once you enter the non-dual state where you suspend all judgment and you attain peace, the light comes and it lights you up and you cannot believe that you're actually in paradise. But verse 114, the last verse, is very disturbing. Simon Peter said to them, make Mary leave us, for females don't deserve wife. And this is, I'm laughing because this is the old Jewish rule. This is Simon. And that women are not allowed in the temple. And again, in Philip, Jesus is kissing Mary Magdalene on the lips. Jesus said, look, I will guide her to make her male so that she too may become a living spirit resembling you males. For every female who makes herself male will enter the kingdom of heaven. And again, he's speaking in the language. Remember, we saw him earlier in Thomas say, make the male female and the female male. And that's not to become, that's to end the war of male superiority over female. And actually, and if you study the old world religions that predate Christianity in the Middle East, the goddess religions, the female actually abused and triumphed over the males and used them as slaves. And the tables have turned like this, is what I'm saying. So what Jesus is saying here, he knows Simon doesn't get it. He knows that he's upset, and he's trying to calm him down and try to get him to see that it's not about the duality of being male and female. It's about the light itself is indivisible. It's not male nor female. It doesn't have gender. And it's not the same thing, obviously, as a person who identifies with the opposite gender. It's nothing like that at all. It's genderless. It is transcendent of male and female. So this is a very difficult thing in the last verse, because we know a lot of the apostles, and also this is in Paul, the Acts of Paul, and which became an enormous portion of the Christian religion. And Paul never walked with Jesus. He was a temple Jew. He believed males were superior. He's part of the philosophy that females were not allowed inside of the Holy of Holies, which gets triumphed by Jesus and Mary Magdalene. And we'll go into that later, because when you go into later their actual marriage in the temple, you'll see what happens. You'll see what happens. But he's really telling Simon Peter to not identify with male or female, to end the duality. Although it reads, if you didn't read the prior verse that said to make the female male and the male female, and vice versa, it makes it sound like she has to shave her head, actually, and become like a male. And there may be some movements of Christianity that got the idea that the female nuns would have to shave.
Funny you talk about women with shaved heads right after what happened yesterday.
What happened yesterday?
Well, between Chris Rock and Will Smith.
Oh, I don't even know what happened. All I know is that All I know is there was a slap. See, I mean,
He
she
slapped her
intentionally.
because he brought up his wife and referred to her as G.I. Jane because of her bald head.
It can be very, very beautiful. I mean, I'm not
Absolutely.
I'm so beyond judgment. Whatever people want to do, it's not my job to judge. I suspend internal judgment in my spirit,
Absolutely.
because when you suspend internal judgment, but you can see that if you're shaving your head because you think you're going to get something for it, then ultimately that's a delusion. But if you're doing it because you love it, remember, in regards to diet, he said, don't eat what you don't like. Don't do what you don't like. It's very, very simple stuff. It's all about, the entire message is about getting out of the judgment of good and evil. But it's, if you suspend judgment, will you find this light that I'm talking about? That I now experience every single day. When I meditated this morning, I woke up and I said, I said to my daughter, I said, how am I going to get high today? Because I don't feel very good when I got up this morning, and have my tea. As soon as I sit and meditate, within 10 minutes, there is so much blinding ecstasy. Everywhere I look, the trees, the rocks, I mean, I live in the mountains. I can't see my neighbors. It's all the kingdom of heaven. It's already here, exactly like Jesus said in Thomas. Anyway, with that, everybody, thank you for being here. We had a few glitches in the beginning, and we'll see you next time. I'm going to continue this through Easter. And after Easter, I urge people to maybe go through these again. And then I'm going to show you various indexes online, because, again, the Gnostic Gospels in the Nag Hammadi Library are not the only resource of Gospels that have been unearthed and have been translated and resurfaced. So I'll do this as long as I can, with my children being a single parent permitting. I'm trying to do this as a form of free service for everybody. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.
Okay, bye.